Hi, my name is Bob Buckley, and I was the composer for ReBoot. I'd had 3 rock and roll bands, and we had a bunch of hit records, and I toured all over the world. I spent about 20 years on the road, and I got sort of bored with it. And I set up my studio at Little Mountain Sound, which is, where Aerosmith and Bryan Adams, a lot of people like that, record there. So I had a studio upstairs there, and I heard about this show that was being produced and that they were looking for a composer. They weren't looking in Vancouver. They were looking in LA and they were looking in England. So I wasn't on their radar at all, but I heard about it. So I went into the office and I said, I'm a composer. Can I submit something? And they said, sure. And I said, can I see some pictures? And I think they showed me some pictures of Megabyte and some early drawings of Enzo and Mainframe and some early drawings that they had. And that was about as much information as I got. So I went up to my studio and I started working on an orchestral score, like a action adventure, Star Wars-ish, orchestral score. And I had the Megabyte theme written, which I ended up, and I had a lot of the opening theme written, which we ended up using. And I had Hexadecimal's theme written and Enzo's theme written. And I submitted it, and I got the job. Mostly because all the submissions that they got from LA and England were all techno music. And they liked the idea of having the music be more grounded in the real world because the world was in a computer, but they wanted to have something that would give it the feeling of being a real world. And they thought what I did worked well for that. So that's how I got the job. I'd done a few series. Yeah, while I was going around the world with my rock and roll band, I was doing a lot of film and television work back here. I can remember being on tour one time and having to fly back to Vancouver every day. We were on tour across Canada, having to fly back to Vancouver every morning, do sessions in the day, and then fly back to the gig at night. And I'm talking about Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, like all the way across. I kept having to fly back to do sessions. So I'd had done some things. And like I said, there was a point where I was ready to make the switch, like do the switch completely and just stop being in rock bands and do that whole thing. And because I was intrigued by TV and TV music and all that sort of stuff.
Had you done any animated
No,
things?
no. It was all live action. When we did the first ReBoot show, I think we had 6 animators. And if I remember correctly, I think it took months to do the first show. Like, because the speed of the computers back then to do the rendering and everything was so slow. And as the show progressed, they hired more and more animators. And I think by the end of the first season, we had well over 100 animators, maybe a couple of 100 animators. And by the end, we were doing almost a show a week, which was a lot of work for me. I mean, I was doing 12-hour days to try and keep up with them, right? To try and keep up with the show. But I think ReBoot might have been one of the first things that started animation in Vancouver. I may be wrong, but it seemed to me that it was the one that started it all up.
First impressions of the hub.
They seemed like they knew what they were doing, and they had. I mean, my background is British, so we share a common sense of humor, and the show is full of that humor, right? So it was useful because I got along with them really well because we had a similar humor and we could have fun together, and we socialized a lot too. I mean, there was a lot of interaction. In the early days, there was very few of us working on the show. I mean, the office at the time was on House Street. I moved my studio into the office. So I was right there with the sound guys and like right there, just one of the team. So we hung out together, had lunch together and, and all of that. So it was very much almost like a family. And my contract that I signed with Chris Broff for the first series of ReBoot was a 1-page letter You know, I've signed contracts that are full of legalese that you can't even understand most of what it says, and you have to take it to a lawyer to have them. But it was a one page, it was very clear, and I loved it. I mean, I thought that was great. I thought that this is a relationship of trust. And not a whole bunch of contracts that are millions of pages long, you know.
So you'd originally seen drawings. You'd never seen a 3D animated show before. What was it like when you finally saw what it was going to look like?
It was very slow because they started off with storyboards, right? That were all just pencil storyboards. That I mean, I scored the first show. I'd say 90% of the score was done to storyboards. I hadn't seen the animation. It was so slow coming. So I was seeing it very slow, and it was layers. I mean, I had a hard time imagining what scenes were going to look like because there were so many just still shots of this is what's going to happen here, and this with a little sign at the bottom of the thing, this is what's going to happen here. And they sort of put it in the computer to try and get an idea of the length of the show, but it all changed. So I was constantly changing the score to try and fit what they were doing because we were like that. So I really didn't see the final animation till close to the end of the first show. And I was blown away by it. I mean, it was incredible. You know, I had no idea that that's what it was going to end up looking like. I kept on trying to imagine what it was going to look like, but it was just pencil drawings was all I had. The show expanded as the technology grew. You know, we had. I'm pretty sure that they invented the software that moved lips to sound, which is used today. And there was a lot of things that they invented to do the show. And I was doing the same thing with my equipment. I was inventing as I was going and expanding my equipment. And the Logic session that I used for the first series, I couldn't even open up in the second series because my whole studio had changed so much. You know, I had a very large studio filled with synthesizers and samplers. I mean, it was filled with equipment as much as you could see. And Chris Broff used to bring clients around, right, to do tours. And he used to love to bring them to my room because, I had these same speakers are what I did ReBoot on. And this keyboard is the same keyboard. And he would bring in, and I had this just stacks of stuff all over the place. And it was great for clients because it looked really impressive. Of course, now everything's in a laptop. It's changed completely. But it was a lot of fun, and it was really hard. You're talking about everything being plugged into a board, and plugs, sometimes half of a stereo pair won't work, so you lose a side and stuff like that. And it was the technology was growing, but it was still in very early stages. I was probably buying a new piece of equipment every couple of weeks. And it started off being mostly synthesizers. But I wanted to be able to reproduce an acoustic orchestra. And the only thing that could do it back then were samplers. So samplers would you go in and record a whole string section doing a note, and then you'd loop it, and then you'd have them play another note and stuff, and you gradually build up a whole sound of strings and do the same thing with the brass and everything else. But the samplers back then had very, very little memory. Like it might be 1 or 2 gigabytes for a whole thing, and you have to try and get a whole orchestra in there. I mean, my sample libraries now, I have a string library now, a sample library that's 1 terabyte. But we had, gigabytes back then. So so I had to have lots of samplers. I probably had 20 or 30 of them, all playing back different parts of the orchestra. And they all had to be, patched in. They all had to be hooked up by MIDI to the thing. And it was, and as things were moving forward, gradually samplers got better, the memory got better. Then samplers started moving inside computers, and you could buy a computer and have it act as a sampler. But as fast as I was going, the technology was growing at the same time. So, and I had to keep up to date. Otherwise, I would not have been able to do what I did later on in the show. You can hear a difference, I think, if you listen to the first show. Even between the first show and halfway through the first series, you can probably start to hear a difference in the sound of the music. And definitely by series 2, quite a big difference in the sound of the music. I love the humor. There were lots of references in there that people in North America didn't have a clue what they were. And even I didn't have a clue. Gavin would have to. I mean, there was one show where they wanted me to quote a 1950s British radio soap opera called Mrs. Dale's Diary, which I'd never heard of. And I could never, there was no recordings of the theme anywhere. So Gavin sang it for me and said, we want something like this. And, you know, it was important to them. But no one else in the world would know what they were talking about.
What was it for? Like,
I can't remember the episode that it was in there. But and then there was another one where they were quoting a show called The Prisoner. Patrick McGowan, and so they did a whole episode based on that, and they wanted me to get reasonably close with the sound of the music, so I had to go back and listen to all those episodes. But I knew that show, you know. But there was lots of references to things, little under jokes that they had for their friends in England that nobody else would necessarily know. The most fun episode, for as far as music was concerned, for me, was Firewall. It was, you know, I loved James Bond movies, and I loved the music for James Bond, especially the early movies, and they wanted that flavor, right? So I had to write basically a James Bond theme that sounded like a James Bond theme, but wasn't a James Bond theme, but with all the things in it. And I think Gavin wrote a lot of the lyrics for that. I'm not sure. They came to me with a set of lyrics and said, make a song out of this. And I sort of edited the lyrics down and wrote the melody. That was one of the few times I brought an actual orchestra in to Mainframe to record. Those are real players on there. And then I had a singer named Jane Mortefi, a local singer here, that could do that voice. It's really high. And it was really at the top of her range. And I knew that she had probably one take in her to sing it, which was true. So I set the microphone up, taught her the tune, said, you know, don't sing it yet. This is probably going to be the first take because you need to hit that note, right? And that was it. I did 3 takes with her, but 90% of the vocal was on the first take. And it was really fun because it was, first of all, it was a chance to work with an orchestra and a chance to work with a singer. But the whole episode I just loved. I loved the energy of it, and I loved that sort of whole James Bondy type thing. I thought it was really cool. The other thing was that in a lot of other series that I've done, because the series builds on itself, a lot of times you can reuse music or change music very slightly and recycle it. And I mean, you listen to a lot of television series, and the music, it gets repeated through the series. I couldn't do that with ReBoot because every show was a different game, and every game required different music. So I had to be full on with every episode. I couldn't ever sit back and go, I can repeat some stuff here. The only stuff that ever got repeated were some of the character themes.
Right.
It wasn't all smooth going by any means. It was a lot of work, and there were definitely challenges. But it was just such a wonderful thing to be working on, just because it kept changing. There was very little repetition, and the storylines kept progressing and stuff like that. And we were, as far as I thought, we were moving towards a feature movie, right? It was supposed to go there. And then we sort of ended up doing, the last couple of seasons, which were sort of movies, but, they were meant to be movies, but they weren't. And I was always looking forward to seeing it on a big screen, and being able to do a score with a real orchestra. And I was really looking forward to it being that. And it unfortunately never. So as far as if I have any sadnesses about it, it never got to be what I think everybody that was involved in it thought it could have been, which is like a motion picture.
If the right people were involved, like the Hub, again, would you come back and score more for a show?
Oh yeah, oh for sure. I wouldn't think twice about it. Yeah.
What do you think was...
That's probably the only thing that would bring me back to episodic television, because it was really a lot of work.
Right.
And like I said, I didn't have any life. But working on that show with those guys, I would do it again, yeah, for sure. As a matter of fact, ReBoot was supposed to come back, and it sort of came back, but not really. And
Yeah. Do you have a favorite character on the show?
wow. Well, I have a favorite character theme.
Okay.
I liked Hexadecimal's theme the best of the themes that I did. I thought it was a really neat theme. It was really spooky. It did that thing where it was in a minor key, but I'm going to get geeky here, but it kept moving up in minor thirds. So I mean, it's sort of, if it started, it would go up. And so it's built on a minor major seventh chord, which is that chord, which is really spooky. And then it would go up there. So it was, I don't think anybody had done music like that for a kids television show, because it was dark, you know, but it was spooky at the same time.
Yeah.
I loved her character.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really original character to have somebody whose face keeps changing like that. I thought it was really neat.
Why do you think we're talking about this show 30 years later? Can you believe it's been 30 years?
I can't believe it. And you know, I've done a lot of stuff. And like I say, this is probably the one show that stands out for me too. I've done, you know, probably 1,000 episodic shows, you know, and ReBoots certainly, and certain episodes of ReBoot certainly stand out to me. Yeah. So I guess it's a testament to its originality and its, you know, being groundbreaking. And I think the guys that created it were fearless. You know, they weren't trying to do something like someone else. They were going to do what they were going to do. And for me, you know, as an artist, I think the most important thing that an artist can be is fearless. Like, not listen to what people think and forge forward with what their true voice is, you know. And sometimes it fails and sometimes it doesn't, but at least at the end of it, you've done something that you feel expresses you, you know. And those guys definitely did that. And I do remember, I mean, this hasn't happened for quite a few years, but I do remember people sending me emails who had analyzed the music for the show like you would analyze, you know, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Like, just pulled it completely apart, and how I bring this theme back and how I inverted that theme there and how this theme gets stretched out there. And asking me all these musical composition questions, which I guess if you want to go there, that stuff may be there. But at the time, the only thing that was driving me was a deadline. That was it. I wasn't thinking about reoccurring themes and stretching themes out and turning themes upside down or backwards or any of that rest of that stuff that composers do. I was just trying to get the show done. I was just trying to get it written and meet the deadline. Because if I hadn't, the last thing to go on the show was the music. And if I didn't meet my deadline for the mixing session, they were going to pay huge amounts of money in fines to the networks for not delivering on time, and that was going to come out of me. So I had to deliver the show, even if it meant staying up for 3 or 4 nights to get it done. I would love there to be a ReBoot movie. I would love to. I know they have the storyline. I'm pretty sure it's sort of semi-written. I would love for that to happen. I think that would just be really cool. And whether there are enough fans around now that would want it, I have no idea. But that would be a really cool thing.
Mm-hmm.